Hey guys, tonight we're exploring a story that everyone in history should know. The story is the medieval characters who never existed. You get comfortable, take a moment, like the video, and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The medieval characters who never existed. The stories that became more real than history. Imagine that the world around you has become wonderfully quiet. The sun has long disappeared beyond the horizon, and only the faint glow of a candle remains. Outside, a cool breeze drifts through narrow stone streets, carrying the distant sound of church bells across the countryside. Somewhere beyond the village, an owl calls into the darkness, while the last travelers hurry home before the city gates close for the night. Now imagine that you are not in the modern world anymore. Instead, you find yourself standing at the edge of medieval Europe. Around you stretch fields that disappear into forests few people dare to enter after sunset. Stone castles rise above nearby hills, their towers watching silently over villages where nearly everyone believes that the world is filled with unseen wonders. Some people speak of saints who perform impossible miracles. Others whisper about dragons sleeping beneath mountains, or mysterious wanderers who appear only during storms. In this quiet medieval world, stories are not simply entertainment. They are companions. They travel farther than merchants, survive longer than kingdoms, and often become stronger than the truth itself. This evening, we are not following the lives of famous kings or queens. We are not retracing the footsteps of great generals or explorers whose names appear in official records. Instead, we are searching for people who never truly lived. That may sound impossible at first. After all, how can someone who never existed become famous enough to shape history? Yet throughout the Middle Ages, countless fictional characters slowly entered everyday life until many ordinary people believed they had once walked the earth. Their names appeared in poems, sermons, paintings, songs, and even serious conversations. Some inspired courage. Others taught moral lessons. A few frightened children into obedience. Many crossed borders without ever taking a single real step. As centuries passed, these imaginary figures became woven into history so tightly that separating legend from reality became surprisingly difficult. Tonight, our journey begins with a simple question. Why did medieval people create characters who never existed? The answer is more fascinating than it first appears. Life during the Middle Ages was uncertain. Most people never traveled far beyond their own villages. News moved slowly, carried by horseback or by travelers whose stories changed slightly every time they were retold. Books were rare, expensive, and copied by hand. Most people learned through conversation rather than reading. When knowledge travels by memory alone, imagination naturally joins the journey. A storyteller might begin with a true event. Perhaps a brave knight defended a bridge, By the time that story reached another village months later, the knight had defeated 50 enemies instead of 5. Another year passed, and perhaps he fought a dragon as well. No one intended to create false history. Stories simply grew. Each generation added something new, polishing rough edges until ordinary people became extraordinary heroes. Over many decades, listeners forgot where reality ended and imagination began. Some characters were born this way. Others were invented completely from the beginning. Monks wrote moral tales featuring noble travelers who represented kindness or greed. Poets imagined perfect kings ruling lands that never existed. Wandering musicians filled marketplaces with adventures about fearless heroes whose courage seemed almost limitless. These stories entertained audiences during long winter nights, but they also carry deeper meanings. A fictional knight could teach honesty better than a sermon. An imaginary queen could demonstrate wisdom more clearly than a history lesson. A mysterious traveler could remind listeners that kindness toward stranger mattered because anyone might secretly be a saint. Whether these people existed became less important than what they represented. That quiet transformation shaped medieval storytelling for hundreds of years. Picture yourself entering a busy market sometime around the 13th century. The marketplace is alive with activity. Farmers arrange vegetables beneath simple wooden stalls. Bakers sell warm loaves fresh from their ovens. Blacksmiths hammer glowing iron, while children weave between crowds, chasing one another through puddles left by the morning rain. Near the center of the square stands a storyteller. He owns no castle. He commands no army. Yet before long, dozens of people gather around him. He begins speaking. His voice rises gently above the sounds of the marketplace. He tells of a knight whose honor has never failed, a king whose wisdom surpasses every ruler alive, a mysterious lady waiting beside an enchanted lake, a wandering scholar who solves impossible riddles. No one interrupts to ask whether these people are real. That is not the purpose of the story. The audience listens, because these characters reveal hopes, fears, and dreams that feel deeply familiar. Children imagine becoming the knight. Adults reflect upon difficult choices hidden inside the tale. Older listeners quietly remember stories told by their own grandparents many years earlier. By sunset, several people leave the marketplace already repeating the adventure to friends who had arrived too late to hear it. The story continues traveling. It changes slightly. Then again. Then again. Eventually, no one remembers its first beginning. This is how legends quietly grow. Modern readers sometimes imagine medieval people as unusually gullible. History suggests something much more interesting. Many listeners understood that stories mixed truth with imagination. They enjoyed them anyway. After all, modern audiences still love fictional films inspired by history. We know dragons never ruled kingdoms. We understand superheroes never defended medieval castles. Yet these stories continue because they express emotions that facts alone cannot always capture. The medieval world worked in much the same way. truth and imagination lived comfortably beside each other. Sometimes they even strengthened one another. Religious stories offered another powerful influence. Throughout Europe, sermons often included short fictional examples called exempla. These brief tales featured invented travelers, merchants, knights, or peasants facing moral choices. The audience understood the lesson immediately because they recognized themselves inside the characters. Whether the merchant truly lived mattered far less than whether listeners learned generosity. Gradually, these fictional people spread beyond churches into ordinary conversation. Some eventually gained reputations almost equal to historical individuals. Imagine hearing the same character mentioned by priests, poets, musicians, and travelers over several decades. Eventually, that person begins to feel surprisingly real. The boundary between literature and memory becomes beautifully blurred. This blending created one of medieval Europe's richest traditions. Not every legendary figure was a warrior. Some were wise judges. Some were wandering fools. Some represented perfect loyalty. Others embodied dangerous temptation. Each reflected values that medieval society admired or feared. Many names survived because they answered questions that history alone could not answer. What does perfect courage look like? What happens when pride grows too large? Can kindness just overcome violence? How should a ruler behave? Instead of writing philosophical essays, medieval storytellers created unforgettable people. These people never breathed. Yet somehow, they continued living inside millions of minds. As the centuries passed, artists painted them onto castle walls. Scribes copied their adventures into beautifully decorated manuscripts. Minstrels transformed them into songs. Children heard their names before falling asleep beside crackling fireplaces. Travelers carried them across mountains and seas. Kings listened to their stories. Farmers repeated them during harvest. Monks carefully preserved them inside libraries. Few fictional characters in history have traveled so widely. Perhaps that is why many remain recognizable today. Even now, hundreds of years later, echoes of these medieval inventions continue appearing in novels, films, television, and games. Their original creators could never have imagined such remarkable survival. Yet their stories endured because they touched something timeless inside human nature. We have always searched for heroes larger than life. We have always invented companions for our fears. We have always shaped imaginary people into mirrors reflecting our deepest hopes. The Middle Ages simply expressed that desire in unforgettable ways. As tonight's quiet journey unfolds, we will meet knights whose bravery became impossible to measure, rulers who governed kingdoms that never appeared on any map, mysterious wanderers whose wisdom seemed endless, and legendary figures whose stories cross continents despite their complete absence from historical records. Some began as poems. Others emerged from folklore. A few were created almost accidentally through centuries of retelling. Each reminds us that history is shaped not only by those who truly lived, but also by those humanity wished had lived. Sometimes imagination leaves footprints just as lasting as reality. And perhaps that is one of the gentlest mysteries of the medieval world. The candle burns a little lower now. The village outside has grown quieter. Only the wind continues its patient journey across fields and forests that have witnessed countless forgotten stories. Somewhere another storyteller prepares to begin another tale. Another imaginary traveler is about to set out on another impossible adventure, and before long, listeners will believe they have met someone who never existed at all. How legend slowly created a ruler greater than history. As the night grows a little deeper, imagine the soft glow of countless candles flickering behind the narrow windows of a great stone castle. Outside, the wind moves gently through ancient oak trees, while somewhere in the distance a horse slowly makes its way along a muddy road. The day has ended, and with it the noise of markets and workshops. What remains is the quiet rhythm of a medieval evening, a perfect time for another story. Tonight we meet perhaps the most famous medieval ruler who never truly existed in the way countless people imagined him. His name was King Arthur. Few names have traveled farther through history than Arthur's. For hundreds of years, people spoke of him as though they were remembering a real king whose wisdom united Britain during its darkest days. His image appeared in castles, churches, royal courts, poems, paintings, and songs. Children admired him. Knights wished to imitate him. Even powerful kings hoped that people would compare them to Arthur. Yet when historians carefully search the surviving records of early medieval Britain, certainty quietly disappears. There is no contemporary document that clearly describes a King Arthur ruling a magnificent kingdom filled with noble knights gathered around a perfectly round table. No royal decree survives bearing his unmistakable seal. No historian, writing during his supposed lifetime, leaves behind a detailed account of such an extraordinary ruler. Instead, Arthur slowly emerges from shadows. The earliest references are remarkably brief. Rather than describing a mighty king, they hint at a warrior, perhaps a military leader, whose victories became larger each time his story was told. The details remain uncertain, and historians continue to debate whether any real individual inspired the legend. Imagine generations of storytellers sitting beside warm fires during long winters. One begins speaking of a brave leader who defended his homeland against invading armies. Years later, another storyteller repeats the tale, adding a remarkable victory. Another generation introduces a magical sword. Another imagines loyal companions, unlike any ordinary soldiers. Little by little, the story grows. The leader becomes a king. The king gains a castle. The castle welcomes noble knights. Soon, an entire kingdom begins to appear around someone who may have started as nothing more than a faint memory. By the 12th century, Arthur had become far greater than anyone could have imagined centuries earlier. Writers across Europe eagerly expanded his world. Each author added new characters. Each poet imagined fresh adventures. Each generation polished the legend until it sparkled with ideals rather than historical certainty. result became one of the greatest fictional worlds ever created during the Middle Ages. Picture yourself entering the magnificent hall where Arthur's court is said to have gathered. A great fire warms the room. Long banners hang from stone walls. Candles illuminate polished armor. The smell of roasted meat drifts gently through the air while musicians quietly play soft melodies upon their harps. Around a remarkable table sit knights whose reputations have spread across kingdoms. The table itself is unlike any other. It is perfectly round. No chair stands above another. No knight occupies a position of greater honor simply because of birth or wealth. Whether or not such a table ever existed hardly mattered to medieval audiences. Its shape carried an idea. Justice, equality, shared responsibility. The Round Table became one of history's most powerful symbols because it represented something people deeply hoped good rulers might achieve. That hope mattered more than architectural reality. Arthur himself slowly transformed into the perfect medieval king. He became brave without cruelty, powerful without arrogance, wise without weakness, generous without waste, patient without hesitation. These qualities reflected not the complicated reality of government, but humanity's dream of perfect leadership. Real kings struggled with difficult decisions. Arthur almost always found the honorable path. Real kingdoms suffered political conflict. Camelot appeared peaceful, at least until tragedy quietly approached. Real rulers grew old, made mistakes, and lost battles. Legend allowed Arthur to become something greater. He became an example. This explains why so many medieval rulers eagerly connected themselves to Arthur's story. Some claimed distant family connections. Others displayed Arthurian symbols during ceremonies. A few even searched for places linked to his legend. If people believed Arthur represented ideal kingship, then sharing part of his story strengthened a ruler's own image. History and imagination became partners. Neither seemed eager to separate from the other. As Arthur's legend expanded, remarkable companions joined him. Sir Lancelot appeared as the greatest knight. Sir Gawain embodied courage and courtesy. Sir Percival pursued spiritual perfection. Sir Kay offered sharp humor. Sir Bedivere demonstrated unwavering loyalty. Each knight reflected different virtues admired throughout medieval society. Together, they formed not merely an army, but a collection of human ideals. Imagine listening to these stories as a young apprentice living in a small village. Perhaps your daily life consists of hard work from sunrise until sunset. Fields require constant care. Food remains uncertain. Winter always approaches. Then one evening, a traveler arrives carrying tales of Camelot. Suddenly another world opens before you. A world where courage overcomes fear, where loyalty matters more than wealth, where ordinary people may perform extraordinary deeds through honesty and determination. These stories offered hope, not because listeners expected Camelot to exist somewhere beyond the next forest, but because they wished such goodness could exist. Even today, Arthur continues living because he represents possibilities rather than certainty. Modern historians examine ancient manuscripts searching for clues about possible historical origins. Some suggest several different warriors may have inspired portions of the legend. Others argue that Arthur became a symbolic figure woven together from many local traditions. No single answer satisfies every question. Perhaps that uncertainty explains why the legend remains so fascinating. Mystery leaves room for imagination. The magical elements surrounding Arthur also grew gradually. The sword in the stone, the lady of the lake, the wizard Merlin, the enchanted island of Avalon. None appeared fully formed at the beginning. Each entered the legend over many generations, enriching the story with wonder while moving it farther from historical reality. Yet medieval audiences rarely objected. Magic expressed truths that ordinary events sometimes could not. A miraculous sword symbolized rightful leadership. An enchanted lake represented mysteries beyond human understanding. A wise wizard reminded listeners that knowledge should guide power. Fantasy quietly strengthened the moral lessons hidden within the tales. As the centuries passed, Arthur's influence crossed borders. French poets transformed his adventures. German writers embraced his knights. English chroniclers proudly claimed him as part of Britain's ancient heritage. Soon his stories reached places that had never seen Britain's rolling hills or rugged coastlines. Arthur belonged to everyone. He had become larger than geography itself. Remarkably, some people attempted to locate Camelot on real maps. Others searched for Arthur's grave. Several places proudly announced connections to the legendary king. Pilgrims visited these locations with genuine curiosity. Whether the evidence proved convincing mattered less than the desire to feel connected to a beloved story. Even educated scholars sometimes struggled to separate legend from history. The line had become beautifully blurred. This blending reveals something important about medieval thinking. People did not always divide the world into strict categories of fact and fiction as modern readers often do. Instead, stories could hold emotional truth, moral truth, spiritual truth, and historical possibility all at once. Arthur did not need to be historically certain in order to inspire courage. His example mattered regardless. As the quiet hours continue, imagine standing once more inside Camelot's great hall. The candles burn lower. The musicians have finished playing. Outside, stars shine above silent forests. The knights have departed for distant roads, carrying hopes larger than themselves. Arthur remains seated for a moment longer. He looks not like a conqueror celebrating victory, but like a guardian carrying the heavy responsibility of protecting peace. Perhaps that image explains why his legend endured. People remembered not simply battles, but kindness, not simply power, but justice, not simply glory, but duty. Whether King Arthur ever ruled exactly as the legends describe may never be known. Yet the king created by medieval imagination proved powerful enough to outlive countless real monarchs whose names have faded into forgotten pages. Sometimes the rulers who never truly existed leave the deepest marks upon history. The castle grows quiet. The last candle flickers gently. Far beyond Camelot, another story is already waiting. This time it belongs to a mysterious old man whose wisdom seems almost limitless, a figure who shaped the destinies of kings, despite leaving almost no trace in the historical record. The wise man who stepped out of myth and into medieval history. The night has become wonderfully still. The fires that once warmed busy village homes have settled into glowing embers, casting soft orange light across rough stone floors. Outside, the moon hangs quietly above the forests, silvering the branches of ancient oak trees that have watched over generations of travelers. Somewhere in the distance, water flows gently over smooth rocks, while a cool breeze carries the scent of damp earth through the sleeping countryside. It is the kind of peaceful night that invites old stories to return. Among all the legendary figures of the medieval world, few possess an atmosphere as mysterious as Merlin. Unlike mighty kings or fearless knights, Merlin rarely defeated enemies with a sword. His greatest strength was something far quieter. He seemed to understand the hidden patterns of the world. He offered advice before disasters arrived. He appeared unexpectedly, changed the course of history, and then quietly disappeared once again into mystery. For centuries, countless people believed that Merlin had truly walked through the forests of Britain. His name inspired wonder. Children listened with wide eyes whenever travelers mentioned him. Noble families proudly collected stories about his wisdom. Monks copied his adventures into beautifully decorated manuscripts, while poets added new chapters to his remarkable life. Yet when historians carefully search for the real Merlin, certainty slowly fades like morning mist. No reliable contemporary record tells us that such a remarkable wizard ever lived. Instead, Merlin seems to emerge from many different traditions, each contributing another piece to an increasingly fascinating puzzle. Imagine standing beside a quiet fire, sometime during the early Middle Ages. A storyteller begins speaking about a strange young man who possesses extraordinary insight. In another village, someone tells of a wild prophet living deep within the forest after surviving the horrors of battle. Elsewhere, another tale describes a mysterious advisor who helps kings make impossible decisions. At first, these stories have little connection, but over many generations, they slowly begin to merge. Separate characters become one. Different legends intertwine. Before long, medieval Europe has created Merlin. This gradual blending reveals something beautiful about storytelling. Legends rarely appear all at once. They grow patiently, gathering ideas from every place they visit. Many scholars believe that one inspiration came from ancient Welsh traditions describing gifted prophets who wandered through lonely wilderness after witnessing terrible wars. These figures were not cheerful magicians casting colorful spells. Instead, they were thoughtful men carrying the heavy burden of knowledge. They understood nature. They noticed patterns others overlooked. Sometimes they spoke in mysterious riddles that listeners only understood years later. As these stories traveled through time, writers transformed them. By the 12th century, one author in particular would forever change Merlin's place in history. His name was Geoffrey of Monmouth. Geoffrey gathered scattered traditions and wove them together into an ambitious history of Britain's ancient rulers. Within those pages, Merlin became far more than a wandering prophet. He became the architect of destiny itself. It was Geoffrey's version that introduced many readers to the Merlin we recognize today. Here was a man capable of astonishing wisdom. He advised kings. He predicted future events. He understood mysteries hidden beneath ordinary appearances. He seemed to exist halfway between the natural world and something beyond human understanding. Whether Geoffrey believed every detail himself remains uncertain. What matters is that readers embraced the story. They wanted Merlin to exist. And so, through literature, he did. Picture yourself walking through a dense medieval forest just before dawn. Mist curls softly between towering trees. Birdsong has not yet begun. The only sounds are your footsteps upon damp leaves and the distant rustling of branches overhead. Then, without warning, you notice an old man standing quietly beneath an ancient oak. His robes are simple. His beard is long. His eyes seem calm, thoughtful, almost impossibly observant. He speaks gently, not loudly, not dramatically, only enough to make you pause. He tells you that every choice creates another path. That power without wisdom soon destroys itself. That patience often accomplishes more than force. This is the Merlin medieval audiences admired. Not merely a magician, a teacher. Unlike many modern portrayals filled with spectacular displays of magic, medieval Merlin often impressed listeners through understanding rather than spectacle. His greatest gift was perception. He recognized truths long before others noticed them. He saw consequences hidden inside seemingly ordinary decisions. His wisdom became more powerful than any spell. Perhaps that explains why his stories survived so successfully. Every society values intelligence guided by humility. Merlin represented exactly that ideal. Of course, the magical elements gradually expanded. The famous tale of Stonehenge offers one example. According to later legend, Merlin arranged for enormous stones to be transported from distant Ireland through supernatural means before constructing the great monument upon Salisbury Plain. Modern archaeology tells a different story. Stonehenge was built thousands of years before the medieval period, and long before any historical Arthur could have lived. Yet medieval audiences found the legend irresistible. Standing before those immense stones, they naturally wondered who could possibly have built such an astonishing place. Without modern archaeology, imagination provided satisfying answers. Merlin quietly stepped into the mystery. In doing so, he transformed an ancient monument into part of Britain's legendary past. This happened again and again throughout medieval storytelling. Whenever people encountered something difficult to explain, they often invited familiar legendary figures into the explanation. Merlin became one of history's favorite problem solvers. Another famous tradition connected him with Arthur's birth. The story tells of Merlin helping Arthur's father through extraordinary magic, setting into motion events that would eventually lead to the future king's arrival. Whether listeners believed every detail literally varied from person to person, but the deeper meaning remained clear. Great leaders often require wise guidance. Power alone cannot build lasting peace. Throughout medieval Europe, this lesson resonated deeply. Kings needed counselors. Warriors needed teachers. Communities needed wisdom as much as courage. Merlin embodied that principle perfectly. As generations passed, artists began imagining his appearance. Interestingly, no single image existed. Some painted him as an elderly sage with flowing white hair. Others preferred a middle-aged scholar. Some showed him dressed almost like a monk. Others clothed him in garments inspired by ancient traditions. Every artist added something personal. Each new illustration quietly reshaped the public imagination. Eventually, the familiar image of the elderly wizard became dominant. Even today, many fictional wizards still resemble medieval depictions of Merlin. His influence extends remarkably far. The wise mentor guiding young heroes. The mysterious traveler appearing at exactly the right moment. The elderly scholar whose greatest weapon is knowledge rather than strength. These beloved characters owe much to Merlin's enduring legacy. His story became the foundation for countless others. Yet perhaps the most peaceful aspect of Merlin's legend lies in its ending. Unlike kings who die in battle or knights remembered through glorious victories, Merlin often fades gently from the story. Some traditions say he withdrew into the forest. Others claim he became trapped forever by enchantment. Still others suggest he simply vanished beyond ordinary human understanding. There is something quietly fitting about such endings. A man devoted to mystery leaves behind mystery. No grand farewell. No triumphant final speech. Only silence. Perhaps medieval audiences appreciated this because life itself rarely offered complete explanations. People disappeared. Old traditions faded. Questions remained unanswered. Merlin reflected that uncertainty. He reminded listeners that not every mystery needs solving. Some are simply meant to accompany us. As this peaceful night continues, imagine the forest once more. The mist has begun to lift. The first birds cautiously welcome the coming dawn. The old wizard stands beneath the ancient trees for one final moment. He smiles, almost imperceptibly, as though recognizing that every generation will invent its own version of him. Then he turns, without haste, without ceremony. He walks deeper into the quiet woodland until the trees gently conceal him from view. Was he ever truly there? History cannot answer with confidence. Yet literature, art, music, and memory continue insisting that he never completely left. That is the quiet power of medieval imagination. It creates people who outlive certainty itself. The forest grows still again. Only the whisper of leaves remains. But another legend is already approaching. one not about a king or a wizard, but about a knight so noble, so pure, and so perfect that many believed he must have truly lived, even though history offers no convincing evidence that he ever did. The perfect knight who captured the medieval imagination. The first light of morning has not yet reached the hills. Across the quiet countryside, a gentle mist rests over fields where farmers will soon begin another day. The forests remain still, their branches barely moving in the cool air. Somewhere far away, a monastery bell softly announces the approach of dawn, its sound drifting through valleys before fading once more into silence. It is in this peaceful hour that another remarkable figure quietly enters our journey. Unlike King Arthur, who represented the dream of a perfect ruler, or Merlin, whose wisdom seemed to belong to another world, this next character embodied something even closer to the medieval heart. He was the knight every young squire hoped to become. His courage appeared limitless. His skill with a sword seemed almost unmatched. His manners reflected perfect courtesy. His loyalty inspired admiration throughout the kingdom. His name was Sir Lancelot. For hundreds of years, audiences across Europe spoke of him as though he had truly ridden across medieval landscapes beneath colorful banners, defending the weak and honoring every promise he made. His adventures appeared in countless manuscripts. Artists painted him, poets celebrated him. Musicians sang about his bravery. Children imagined wearing his shining armor. Yet when historians carefully examine the surviving records, they discover something quietly surprising. No reliable evidence suggests that Sir Lancelot ever existed. In fact, his earliest appearance does not come from ancient British traditions at all. When the oldest stories about King Arthur first began circulating, Lancelot was nowhere to be found. The Round Table already contained brave warriors. Arthur already fought great battles. Merlin already guided the kingdom. But Lancelot had not yet entered the story. That would change during the 12th century. Imagine a medieval writer sitting beside a candle late into the evening. Before him lies fresh parchment, waiting to be filled. He knows audiences already love Arthur's court, but he also senses that something is missing. The kingdom possesses a noble king. It possesses wise advisors. It possesses courageous knights. Yet perhaps it still lacks the perfect hero. So, slowly and carefully, he begins creating one. Not from historical records, not from forgotten chronicles, but from imagination. This new knight would possess every quality admired by medieval society. He would be fearless without becoming reckless, strong without cruelty, generous without expecting reward, humble despite extraordinary ability. Little by little, Sir Lancelot takes shape. One of the writers most responsible for bringing Lancelot to life was the French poet Chrétien de Troyes. His romances transformed Arthur's court into something richer and more emotionally complex than ever before. Here, knights no longer existed simply to win battles. They also struggled with loyalty, love, honor, temptation, and impossible choices. Lancelot quickly became the brightest star among them.
Picture yourself approaching Camelot on a bright spring morning. The castle rises proudly above the surrounding countryside. Its towers shine beneath clear skies. Colorful banners flutter gently in the breeze. Inside the great courtyard, knights gather for another tournament. Their polished armor catches the morning sunlight.
Spectators eagerly wait to see who will prove worthy of admiration. Then one rider quietly enters. He does not boast. He does not demand attention. He simply prepares his horse. There is a calm confidence about him. The crowd gradually notices. Whispers begin spreading. Lancelot has arrived. When the contests begin, his movements appear effortless. He fights with remarkable precision rather than unnecessary violence. He respects defeated opponents. He protects those unable to defend themselves. Victory never makes him arrogant. Defeat never destroys his dignity. This image deeply appealed to medieval audiences. After all, real warfare rarely resembled noble tournaments. Battles were exhausting, frightening, and often brutally chaotic. Lancelot represented the world people wished existed rather than the one they actually experienced. He reminded listeners that strength should always remain under the control of wisdom and compassion. Yet what makes Lancelot especially fascinating is that he was never portrayed as completely flawless. In fact, his greatest popularity emerged because he struggled. His story reminds us that even the noblest people carry hidden burdens. The most famous of these involved Queen Guinevere. According to the later romances, Lancelot and Guinevere developed a deep love for one another despite her marriage to King Arthur. Their affection created one of medieval literature's greatest tragedies. It placed loyalty against love, duty against desire, honor against the human heart. There were no easy answers. For medieval audiences, this conflict felt painfully real. Life often demanded difficult choices. Good people sometimes found themselves trapped between competing responsibilities. Lancelot reflected that reality. He remained heroic not because he avoided mistakes, but because he understood the weight of them. This emotional complexity helped distinguish him from earlier legendary heroes. He was no longer simply a fearless warrior defeating monsters. He became deeply human. Readers sympathized with him. They admired him. Sometimes they even forgave him. That emotional connection explains why his legend spread so rapidly throughout Europe. Soon countless authors expanded his adventures. Each writer imagined new quests. Each added fresh companions. Each explored different aspects of his personality. Some emphasized his unmatched courage. Others celebrated his kindness. Still others focused upon his inner struggles. The result was not one single Lancelot, but many. Every generation quietly created its own version. As manuscripts traveled from kingdom to kingdom, artists eagerly illustrated his adventures. One painting showed him rescuing prisoners. Another depicted him kneeling respectfully before a queen. Elsewhere, he battled towering giants, crossed dangerous bridges, or wandered through enchanted forests. Each image strengthened his reputation. People who could not read still recognized his face. stories belonged not only to books, but also to memory. It is interesting that Lancelot's armor gradually became almost symbolic. Real medieval armor was heavy, practical, and constantly repaired after battle. Legendary illustrations, however, often presented shining perfection. The polished steel reflected not historical accuracy, but moral ideals. Clean armor suggested a clean conscience. Bright metal symbolized honorable character. Everything about Lancelot quietly reinforced the values audiences admired. Perhaps the greatest lesson hidden within his legend concerns perfection itself. At first glance, Lancelot appears almost impossibly accomplished. He wins tournaments. He rescues strangers. He defeats dangerous enemies. He inspires universal admiration. But beneath this brilliance lies gentle sadness. His achievements never fully erase his personal regrets. He discovers that courage cannot solve every problem. Love cannot remove every obstacle. Even the greatest knight cannot create a perfect world. This quiet realism gives his story lasting emotional power. Many fictional heroes succeed because they never fail. Lancelot remains unforgettable because success and sorrow accompany him together. As centuries passed, real knights attempted to imitate his example. Some named horses after him. Others decorated halls with scenes from his adventures. Young nobles learned courtesy through stories describing his behavior. Even though he had never truly lived, Lancelot quietly influenced the conduct of people who certainly had. That remarkable achievement reminds us once again that imaginary characters sometimes shape history almost as powerfully as real individuals. Today, historians recognize Lancelot as one of medieval literature's greatest creations. He tells us less about ancient Britain than about medieval dreams. Through him, we glimpse what people hoped courage might become. Not violence, not conquest, but protection, service, humility, kindness. Those ideals mattered deeply. Perhaps they still do. Now imagine Camelot once more. The tournament has ended. The crowds slowly return home. The banners flutter gently in the evening breeze. Lancelot removes his helmet and gazes quietly across the peaceful fields beyond the castle walls. For a brief moment, he is simply another traveler reflecting upon choices that cannot easily be undone. The fading sunlight softens the stone towers behind him. The horses grow quiet. The voices disappear. Soon only silence remains. Whether Sir Lancelot ever rode across medieval Britain no longer seems the most important question. What matters is that millions believed a knight like him should exist, and through that belief, they encouraged generations to pursue honor, mercy, and compassion. Sometimes the people who never lived inspire the greatest acts among those who do. As the stars slowly appear above Camelot, another familiar figure begins approaching from the edge of the forest. Unlike Lancelot, this knight is remembered not primarily for romance or tournaments, but for an extraordinary journey in search of one of history's most mysterious and sacred objects. His quest would become one of the greatest legends the medieval world ever imagined. The knight who searched for the Holy Grail and became the purest hero of medieval legend. The morning has arrived quietly. A gentle layer of mist still rests across the meadows, softening the outlines of distant hills and old stone cottages. Dew clings to every blade of grass, sparkling whenever the first rays of sunlight find their way through the branches of ancient trees. Somewhere beyond the fields, the steady ringing of a monastery bell welcomes another peaceful day, while birds begin their songs, one by one, as though the world itself is slowly waking from a long and restful sleep. In this calm moment, another traveler joins our journey. Unlike Sir Lancelot, whose greatness was accompanied by heartbreak and difficult choices, this knight seemed almost untouched by the ordinary weaknesses of humanity. His courage never appeared to falter. His faith never seemed to fade. His heart remained astonishingly pure. His name was Sir Galahad. Among all the legendary figures of Arthur's court, no knight stood closer to perfection than Galahad. Medieval storytellers described him not simply as a warrior, but as someone whose entire life reflected spiritual devotion. His victories mattered less than the quiet goodness that guided every decision he made. Yet despite his immense fame, historians have found no convincing evidence that such a knight ever lived. Like many of the greatest heroes of medieval literature, Galahad belonged not to history, but to imagination. His story began surprisingly late. The earliest Arthurian legends knew nothing about him. The famous Round Table already contained celebrated knights whose adventures delighted audiences across Europe. Lancelot had become a symbol of unmatched bravery. Gawain represented courtesy and honor. Percival had already begun searching for mysterious spiritual truths. But Galahad had not yet appeared. It was only during the early 13th century that medieval writers introduced someone who would quietly become the greatest knight of them all. Imagine a monastery where silence fills long stone corridors. Candles burn gently inside a room lined with carefully copied manuscripts. A scribe sits patiently before a sheet of fresh parchment. Outside, rain falls softly against narrow windows while the rest of the world remains distant. The writer pauses for a moment. He has inherited stories filled with brave warriors and magnificent adventures. But perhaps bravery alone no longer feels enough. Perhaps audiences are searching for something deeper. So he begins creating a knight whose greatest weapon will not be his sword, but the purity of his soul. Thus, Galahad quietly enters the medieval imagination. From the very beginning, his life appears almost miraculous, or, according to later legends, Galahad is the son of Sir Lancelot, yet his character follows a remarkably different path. Where Lancelot struggles with temptation, Galahad remains steadfast. Where others wrestle with doubt, Galahad moves forward with calm certainty. He becomes the answer to a question medieval Christians often ask themselves. Could anyone live a life completely devoted to goodness? Rather than answering with philosophy, storytellers answered with, as a person. Picture yourself approaching Camelot once again. The great hall is filled with familiar knights, their conversations echoing gently beneath high wooden beams. The famous round table stands ready for another gathering. Then the doors slowly open. A young knight enters quietly. He wears no extravagant clothing. He carries himself without pride. There is nothing loud or dramatic about his arrival, and yet every person in the hall senses that something extraordinary has happened. The empty chair known as the Siege Perilous waits silently beside the round table. Legend says that anyone unworthy who attempts to sit there will meet immediate death. For generations, the seat has remained untouched. No knight dares approach it. Galahad walks forward without hesitation. His movements are calm. His face reflects neither fear nor arrogance. He simply sits. Nothing happens. The silence inside the hall becomes almost overwhelming. The impossible has quietly become possible. This scene carried enormous symbolic meaning for medieval audiences. The chair did not merely test physical courage. It represented spiritual worthiness. Only someone whose heart remained free from selfish ambition could safely occupy that place. Whether listeners believed such an event literally occurred mattered less than the lesson it conveyed. True greatness begins within. Soon afterward, another mystery unfolds. A sword embedded in stone appears near a river. Many experienced knights attempt to draw it. One after another, they fail. Their strength proves insufficient. Then Galahad steps forward. Without struggle, he gently removes the sword. Again, the message is clear. Power belongs not to the strongest hands, but to the purest intentions. These stories echoed older legends, including Arthur's own famous sword. Yet Galahad's version shifted attention away from kingship toward spiritual character. His greatest adventure soon begins. It is the search for the Holy Grail. Among all the objects imagined during the Middle Ages, few inspired greater wonder. The Grail was often described as the cup associated with Christ's Last Supper, though different stories offer different origins and meanings. Some portrayed it as a miraculous vessel overflowing with divine grace. Others treated it as an object that could never fully be explained by ordinary language. Whatever its exact nature, one truth remained constant. Only the worthiest soul could truly behold it. Many knights began the quest. Some possessed extraordinary courage, others unmatched intelligence. Some relied upon experience gained through years of battle. Yet one by one, they fell short. Not because they lacked skill, because they still carried pride, anger, fear, or regret. Their journeys became mirrors, reflecting the imperfections shared by all humanity. Galahad alone continued moving forward. Imagine following him through quiet forests, where sunlight filters gently through green leaves. He crosses clear rivers whose waters reflect drifting clouds. He climbs lonely hills where ancient ruins rest beneath wild flowers. He enters peaceful chapels where candles burn before simple stone altars. Unlike many heroes, Galahad rarely rushes. He listens, he reflects, he prays. Even the landscapes around him seem calmer than those surrounding other knights. The world itself appears to recognize his peaceful heart. Throughout these journeys, battles certainly occur. Danger still exists, but violence never becomes
the center of the story. Instead, every encounter reveals another lesson about humility, mercy, forgiveness, or faith. This distinguished Galahad from nearly every legendary warrior before him. He did not seek glory, he sought understanding. That quiet difference transformed him into one of medieval literature's most remarkable creations. Many historians believe Galahad reflected changing religious ideals during the High Middle Ages. Earlier generations had celebrated physical heroism above all else. Now spiritual perfection increasingly captured the imagination. Knighthood itself was evolving. People wanted warriors who protected not only kingdoms, but also moral values. Galahad embodied this dream completely. Eventually, after many trials, Galahad reaches the end of the Grail quest. The experience cannot easily be described. Different medieval writers offered different details. Some emphasized overwhelming light. Others spoke of profound peace beyond ordinary human understanding. Still others deliberately left much unexplained. Perhaps they believed sacred mysteries should remain mysterious. In many versions, Galahad does not return to ordinary life afterward. Having completed the quest, his earthly journey gently comes to an end. There is no tragic defeat, no desperate final battle, only a quiet departure filled with hope. It is one of the gentlest endings in all medieval literature. Rather than mourning him, readers are invited to celebrate a life fully completed. That peaceful conclusion explains why Galahad remained deeply beloved for centuries. He represented not worldly success, but inner peace. As manuscripts spread across Europe, artists eagerly illustrated his adventures. One painting showed him kneeling before the Grail. Another depicted him riding alone beneath towering trees. Elsewhere, he appeared praying before battle rather than celebrating afterward. Again and again, artists emphasized serenity rather than conquest. His face almost always reflected calm confidence. Even today, Galahad's name continues to symbolize purity, integrity, and selfless purpose. People who know little about medieval literature still recognize the phrase, a Galahad, as someone exceptionally honorable. Few fictional characters have left such a lasting impression upon language itself. As the afternoon sunlight slowly softens across Camelot, imagine Galahad riding quietly toward the horizon. He does not look back. The castle grows smaller behind him. The forests welcome him once more. The birds continue singing overhead. His horse walks at an unhurried pace, carrying a knight who never sought fame, only truth. Perhaps that is why he remains unforgettable. History remembers countless warriors whose names have faded. Yet the gentle knight, who never truly lived, continues inspiring readers hundreds of years later. Sometimes the quietest legends travel the farthest. The day slowly begins to fade. Golden light settles upon the fields. The bells ring once again across the peaceful countryside. And somewhere beyond the hills, another remarkable figure is already waiting. Unlike Galahad, whose purity guided every step, this next legendary traveler is remembered for impossible adventures across distant lands where strange creatures, hidden kingdoms,
and marvelous wonders blurred the line between medieval imagination and the unknown world. The traveler who explored a world that never existed. As the afternoon slowly gives way to evening, the golden light softens across the fields. Shadows grow longer beneath ancient trees, and the warm air carries the gentle scent of freshly cut hay. In the distance, the quiet murmur of a river blends with the occasional song of birds preparing to settle for the night. One by one, villagers return home along winding dirt paths, while smoke rises peacefully from the chimneys of small stone cottages. It is another peaceful evening in the medieval world, the kind of evening when stories begin to travel farther than the people who tell them. Tonight, our journey leaves the familiar halls of Camelot and the forests of Britain behind. Instead, we follow a traveler. Or perhaps, more accurately, we follow a man who claimed to be a traveler. His name was Sir John Mandeville. For centuries, readers believed they were holding the genuine memoirs of a knight who had spent more than 30 years wandering across the known world. According to his own account, he visited the Holy Land, crossed the deserts of Egypt, sailed through distant Asia, and encountered kingdoms unlike anything most Europeans had ever imagined. His book became one of the most widely read works of the Middle Ages. Kings owned copies, monasteries carefully preserved it, merchants consulted it, pilgrims carried it on long journeys. Ordinary readers dreamed of visiting the remarkable places it described. Yet today, historians know something quite extraordinary. There is almost no convincing evidence that Sir John Mandeville ever existed. The traveler who inspired generations of explorers may himself have been entirely fictional. Imagine opening a beautifully copied manuscript sometime during the 14th century. Its pages are decorated with colorful illustrations of castles, mountains, rivers, and distant cities. The handwriting is elegant, carefully formed by skilled scribes working patiently beneath candlelight. The first pages introduce the author. He speaks with quiet confidence. He tells readers that he has traveled farther than almost anyone else alive. He has witnessed astonishing cultures. He has crossed dangerous seas. He has survived impossible adventures. His calm voice immediately inspires trust. Why would anyone doubt such a confident witness? As medieval readers turned each page, the world grew larger. Jerusalem appeared before them. The deserts of Arabia stretched endlessly beneath the burning sun. The mighty cities of Persia welcomed travelers from every direction. India shimmered with unimaginable wealth. Far beyond those lands lay regions unlike anything Europe had ever known. Or so it seemed. Picture yourself as a medieval reader. Perhaps you have never traveled farther than the nearest market town. Maps are rare. Reliable information about distant lands is even rarer. Every foreign country feels mysterious. Every unfamiliar custom seems almost magical. Then you discover Mandeville's remarkable book. Suddenly, the entire world unfolds before you. He describes islands where enormous diamonds sparkle beneath rivers, mountains filled with strange creatures, kingdoms inhabited by people whose appearance seems almost impossible to believe. Some possess only one enormous foot, which they supposedly use as protection from the hot sun. Others are said to have faces upon their chests instead of their heads. Elsewhere live giants, tiny kingdoms, mysterious birds, and extraordinary beasts, unlike any animal Europe had ever seen. To modern readers, these descriptions sound wonderfully imaginative. But medieval audiences approached them differently. Many accepted at least part of what they read, not because they were foolish, because verifying distant information was extraordinarily difficult. If no one you knew had visited India, who could confidently reject stories about India? In a world without photographs, satellites, or instant communication, imagination quietly filled the empty spaces between known places. That is exactly where Mandeville's genius flourished. His book blended genuine geography with legend. Real cities appeared beside imaginary kingdoms. Authentic customs stood alongside impossible creatures. Historical facts gently intertwined with centuries of folklore. The result felt believable precisely because truth and fantasy lived together so naturally. Modern historians have spent many years studying the origins of Mandeville's remarkable work. Their discoveries reveal another fascinating mystery. Much of the book was borrowed. Passages resemble earlier travel accounts written by genuine pilgrims. Descriptions of distant lands often came from older books, rather than first-hand experience. Legends collected over hundreds of years quietly found new life inside Mandeville's narrative. It was less a diary than a magnificent tapestry woven from countless older stories. Yet whoever created the book possessed remarkable literary skill. The voice remained consistent. The observations felt personal. Readers believed they were accompanying one thoughtful traveler across the world. Whether that traveler actually existed became almost irrelevant. The journey itself felt real. Imagine walking beside Mandeville through the crowded streets of Jerusalem. Merchants speak dozens of different languages. Pilgrims arrive from distant kingdoms, carrying hopes, fears, and prayers. The smell of spices fills the busy marketplaces. Church bells mingle with unfamiliar sounds, drifting through narrow streets. Everything appears vivid. Everything feels convincing. Then, almost without noticing, you leave history behind. Soon, dragons appear. Marvelous rivers promise miraculous properties. Kingdoms unlike anything on earth quietly emerge beyond the horizon. Yet because the transition happens so gently, readers continue believing. The impossible feels surprisingly ordinary. Perhaps that is the greatest achievement of medieval storytelling. It never forces wonder. It invites it patiently. One of the book's most enduring themes is curiosity. Mandeville encourages readers to look beyond familiar horizons. Even when his descriptions prove inaccurate, his deeper message remains powerful. The world is larger than we imagine. There are always new people to understand, new landscapes to explore, new questions waiting patiently for answers. In this way, the fictional traveler inspired countless real ones. Historians believe explorers during the Age of Discovery often carried copies of Mandeville's book. Some hoped to find the marvelous places he described. Others searched for legendary kingdoms that had never existed. Christopher Columbus himself read books filled with similar medieval geography before beginning his own voyages. Reality and imagination worked together. Legends encouraged exploration. Exploration gradually corrected legends. Human knowledge quietly expanded through both. As maps improved during the 15th and 16th centuries, many of Mandeville's extraordinary claims became impossible to defend. Explorers returned home with more accurate descriptions. Ancient myths slowly faded. One-headed giants disappeared from serious geography. Impossible kingdoms quietly slipped back into legend. Yet the book never completely vanished. Readers continued enjoying it, no longer as reliable geography, but as wonderful literature. Today, historians admire Mandeville for different reasons, not because he accurately described distant lands, because his work reveals how medieval people imagined the wider world. Their hopes, their fears, their endless curiosity. The book becomes a window into the medieval imagination itself. Perhaps Sir John Mandeville never crossed deserts beneath burning suns. Perhaps he never sailed across distant oceans. Perhaps he never climbed mountains at the edge of the known world. But through his pages, millions of readers certainly did. His imaginary footsteps carried generations far beyond the boundaries of everyday life. That is no small achievement. As evening deepens, imagine our traveler reaching the crest of a quiet hill. Before him stretches another unfamiliar horizon. The sky glows softly, with fading shades of gold and violet. He pauses for a moment, looking toward lands that exist only in stories. Then with calm determination, he continues walking. Not because he knows exactly where the road will lead, but because another wonder may always lie beyond the next hill. The light slowly disappears. Stars begin appearing one by one above the peaceful countryside. The roads grow quiet again. Somewhere far away, another storyteller opens an old manuscript and prepares to introduce a new legend. This time it is not about a traveler searching for distant kingdoms, but about a ruler unlike any king who ever lived. A mysterious Christian emperor said to govern an unimaginably wealthy paradise somewhere beyond the edges of the medieval map. For centuries, people searched for him. They sent letters to him. Some even believed he would one day save Christendom itself. And yet, no trace of his kingdom has ever been found. The invisible emperor, whom medieval Europe never stopped searching for night, has settled gently across the land. The villages have grown quiet, their narrow streets illuminated only by the soft glow of candles shining through small wooden windows. The day's work has ended. Horses rest inside their stables, and the last embers of cooking fires slowly fade into a warm orange light. Above everything stretches a sky filled with countless stars, brighter than most people in the modern world ever have the chance to see. It is a peaceful night. The
kind of night when distant places seem closer than they truly are, when the imagination quietly begins its own journey beyond the familiar horizon. Tonight we leave behind wandering nights and mysterious travelers. Instead, we search for a king whose kingdom inspired centuries of hope. A ruler whom countless people believed was real. A monarch to whom letters were written. A sovereign whom explorers hope to meet. Yet no historian has ever found convincing evidence that he existed. His name was Prester John. Unlike King Arthur, whose legend grew gradually from stories of ancient Britain, Prester John seemed to appear almost suddenly. One day, medieval Europe simply began hearing astonishing reports. Far away, somewhere beyond the lands known to ordinary travelers, there ruled a mighty Christian emperor. His kingdom overflowed with unimaginable wealth. Its people lived in peace. Its churches glittered with gold. Justice guided every law. Faith united every citizen. Wild beasts obeyed their rulers. Miracles seemed almost ordinary. It sounded less like a kingdom and more like paradise itself. Imagine living in Europe during the 12th century. Travel is dangerous. Wars regularly reshape borders. Pilgrims return from the Holy Land carrying stories of conflict and uncertainty. News arrives slowly, often months or years after events have taken place. Then one afternoon, a merchant reaches your town. He speaks of an extraordinary empire, somewhere beyond Persia. Its ruler is not merely a king. He is both priest and emperor, wise, powerful, deeply faithful. His armies are said to be enormous, his riches beyond counting, his lands untouched by the troubles facing Europe. You have never met anyone who has visited this distant kingdom. Yet the merchant sounds sincere. Others nod in agreement. Before long, the story begins spreading. Village after village, castle after castle, monastery after monastery. The legend quietly takes root. One of the greatest reasons people believed in Prester John was a remarkable document known today as the Letter of Prester John. Sometime during the 12th century, copies of this extraordinary letter began circulating across Europe. According to the document, it had been written by Prester John himself to the Byzantine emperor. The letter described an astonishing realm unlike anything readers had ever imagined. There were rivers flowing with precious stones, gardens that never faded, palaces built from crystal and gold. Creatures drawn from both scripture and folklore wandered peacefully through the countryside. Justice was perfect. Poverty scarcely existed. Every description invited readers to believe they were discovering the greatest kingdom on earth. Modern historians know that the letter was almost certainly a literary creation. No authentic original has ever been found. Its descriptions combine biblical imagery, medieval imagination, and older legends, gathered from many different cultures. Yet medieval readers rarely questioned its authenticity. The document felt convincing. It contained details. It sounded confident. Most importantly, it offered hope. Picture yourself sitting inside a monastery library. Rain taps softly against the windows, while candles illuminate shelves filled with precious manuscripts. A monk carefully unfolds the famous letter.
The room grows quiet. As he begins reading aloud, everyone listens. The kingdom he describes seems almost impossible. Its cities are beautiful beyond imagination. Its ruler is wise beyond measure. Its people live according to perfect justice. No listener interrupts to ask whether every detail can be verified. Instead, they wonder something else. Could such a place truly exist? That question lingered for centuries. One remarkable feature of the legend was that Prester John's kingdom never remained in one place. At first, many believed it lay somewhere in India. At the time, medieval Europeans possessed only limited geographical knowledge of Asia. India often referred not only to the modern country, but to vast regions beyond the familiar world. As maps slowly improved, the kingdom seemed to move. Some believed it had shifted into Central Asia. Later generations became convinced that it must be hidden somewhere within Africa, especially in the Christian kingdom of Ethiopia. Each time explorers failed to find it, the legend simply traveled farther away. The destination changed. The dream remained. Imagine standing beside a map maker in the 14th century. His workshop smells of fresh parchment and ink. Wooden rulers, compasses, and colorful pigments lie neatly arranged upon a large table. He studies reports from travelers arriving from distant lands. Some descriptions agree, others contradict one another completely. How should he draw the unknown parts of the world? In one empty space beyond familiar kingdoms, he carefully writes a name: Prester John. Not because he knows the kingdom exists, but because so many respected people believe it does. The map itself quietly strengthens the legend. Future travelers see the name. They assume someone else has already confirmed it. Thus, imagination becomes geography. For many medieval Christians, the existence of Prester John carried profound emotional meaning. Europe often felt surrounded by uncertainty. Political rivalries divided kingdoms. Religious conflicts caused suffering. The Crusades brought both hope and heartbreak. During such difficult times, the idea of a powerful Christian emperor beyond the horizon offered comfort. Perhaps one day they imagined his armies would arrive, and perhaps together they would restore peace. Perhaps distant allies already waited patiently beyond the deserts and mountains. History repeatedly shows that hope often travels faster than evidence. Kings themselves took the legend seriously. Several rulers attempted to establish contact. Messengers were sent eastward carrying letters intended for the mysterious emperor. Diplomats searched for clues. Explorers questioned merchants. Pilgrims listened carefully for rumors. Generation after generation continued looking. No one returned with certainty. Yet neither did anyone completely destroy the dream. The search itself became part of the story. Modern readers may wonder why educated people believed such tales for so long. The answer lies partly in the medieval understanding of the unknown. Large portions of Africa and Asia remained mysterious to most Europeans. Without reliable information, extraordinary possibilities seemed entirely reasonable. If no one had thoroughly explored every distant mountain or desert, who could confidently declare that an unseen kingdom did not exist? The unknown naturally welcomed imagination. In many ways, Prester John became the medieval world's perfect invisible ruler. Always distant, always hopeful, always just beyond the next horizon. Even as Portuguese explorers gradually sailed farther along Africa's coast during the 15th century, many continued searching for his kingdom. Some believed Ethiopia might finally reveal the truth. Others expected the mysterious emperor to appear farther inland. Reality slowly replaced legend. Yet the legend never disappeared overnight. It gently faded as knowledge expanded. Perhaps the greatest irony of Prester John's story is this. Although the emperor himself almost certainly never existed, his legend inspired real journeys, real ships sailed, real ambassadors traveled, real maps improved, real cultures eventually met one another. A fictional king quietly influenced genuine history. His invisible kingdom helped encourage visible exploration. That alone makes him one of the most remarkable fictional characters of the medieval age. As midnight approaches, imagine standing upon a lonely hill overlooking an endless landscape. Far beyond the darkness lies another continent. Somewhere beyond countless rivers and mountains, perhaps another kingdom waits, or perhaps only another story. The stars shine peacefully overhead. A gentle breeze moves through the tall grass. You realize that not every journey ends with the discovery. Sometimes the search itself changes the traveler. Perhaps that is the true legacy of Prester John. Not that people found him, but that they never stopped believing the world might still contain unexpected wonders. The night grows quieter still. The candles burn lower. Another page of our long journey gently turns. Soon we will meet a figure whose reputation spread through marketplaces, monasteries, and royal courts alike. A mysterious woman said to possess impossible wisdom, whose prophecies captivated medieval imaginations despite leaving almost no trace in reliable history. The prophetess, who never truly belonged to history. The deepest hours of the night have arrived. The world seems wrapped in a gentle silence. The wind has grown softer, and even the forests appear to be resting beneath the silver glow of the moon. Along quiet monastery walls, candles continue to burn patiently, their small flames dancing whenever a cool draft slips through the narrow stone windows. Somewhere far away, a stream whispers over smooth stones, keeping the only conversation that remains awake until morning. It is during these peaceful hours that stories often become their most mysterious. Not because darkness creates fear, but because quiet gives imagination room to wander. Tonight we meet a woman whose voice was said to echo across centuries, a woman who supposedly knew the future long before it arrived. Kings listened for her wisdom. Monks copied her prophecies. Artists painted her beside biblical prophets. Poets treated her words with remarkable respect. Yet historians searching for her discover only fragments, traditions, and legends woven together across many generations. She was known simply as the Sibyl. Unlike King Arthur or Merlin, the Sibyl was never one clearly defined person. Instead, she became many women at once, Ancient Greece had spoken of prophetic women long before the Middle Ages began. The Romans preserved their stories. Christian scholars later inherited them.
Then medieval Europe quietly transformed them into something entirely new. Imagine a story crossing more than 1,000 years. Every generation adds a small detail. Every culture reshapes the tale. Every language gives the mysterious woman a slightly different voice. Eventually, no one remembers exactly where she first appeared. Only her reputation remains. The medieval Sibyl was less a historical figure than a living tradition. Picture yourself entering a quiet monastery library, sometime during the 13th century. The room smells faintly of parchment, ink, and old wood. Shelves hold manuscripts copied with extraordinary patience. A monk gently opens a beautifully decorated book. Among its pages appear familiar biblical prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. Then unexpectedly, another figure appears. Not a prophet from Scripture, but a woman from ancient legend. The Sibyl. To modern readers, this seems surprising. Why would Christian manuscripts include a figure from classical mythology? The answer reveals something beautiful about medieval thought. Many scholars believed that God could allow glimpses of truth to appear even beyond the borders of Israel. According to certain traditions, the Sibyl had foretold the coming of Christ centuries before his birth. Whether these prophecies genuinely belonged to ancient times mattered less than the spiritual lesson medieval readers found within them. Wisdom, they believed, could sometimes appear in unexpected places. As the legend grew, different Sibyls emerged. The Delphic Sibyl, the Cumaean Sibyl, the Tiburtine Sibyl. Each possessed her own stories. Each spoke mysterious words open to many interpretations. Some lived beside sacred caves. Others wandered lonely mountains. Some received visions through dreams. Others spoke while overwhelmed by divine inspiration. Gradually, medieval storytellers blended these separate traditions together. The result became a timeless prophetess whose voice seemed to reach across history itself. Imagine climbing a narrow mountain path just before sunrise. Mist curls around ancient rocks. The air feels cool and wonderfully still. High above the valley stands a small cave. No guards protect it, no banners mark its entrance. Only silence waits. Inside sits an elderly woman. Her clothing is simple. Her face bears the quiet marks of many years. She looks toward you with calm eyes that seem less interested in the present than in centuries yet to come. She speaks softly, not in commands, not in certainty, but in images. She describes stars moving across unfamiliar skies, kingdoms rising before gently falling once again, empires forgetting the lessons of those that came before, children inheriting a world shaped by choices they never witnessed. Her words are beautiful, mysterious, impossible to fully understand. Only later, after events unfold, do listeners begin believing they recognize their meaning. This style of prophecy fascinated medieval audiences. The future remained uncertain for everyone. Harvests failed. Kings died unexpectedly. Wars erupted with little warning. Disease sometimes arrived without explanation. People naturally longed for signs that someone somewhere understood the pattern hidden beneath life's uncertainty. The Sibyl became that reassuring voice. Whether she truly existed no longer seemed the central question. She represented humanity's endless desire to understand tomorrow. One remarkable legend told of the Tiburtine Sibyl meeting the Roman Emperor Augustus. According to medieval tradition, Augustus wondered whether he should accept worship as a god. The Sibyl answered not with praise but with a vision. She showed him a radiant mother holding a child. A heavenly voice declared that this child would become greater than every earthly ruler. The emperor, humbled by the revelation, supposedly refused divine honors. Modern historians recognize this beautiful story as a later Christian legend rather than an authentic Roman event. Yet medieval artists adored it. Churches displayed paintings of Augustus gazing upward in wonder while the Sibyl quietly pointed toward the heavenly vision. The story united ancient Rome with Christian hope. Again, imagination served a deeper purpose. Throughout Europe, the Sibyl appeared in unexpected places. Cathedrals carved her image into stone. Illuminated manuscripts surrounded her with golden decorations. Christmas plays sometimes gave her speaking roles. Composers even included her prophecies in sacred music. It is remarkable how thoroughly an almost entirely legendary figure entered medieval religious culture. She became part of the shared imagination of an entire civilization. Unlike Merlin, whose wisdom often guided individual kings, the Sibyl addressed humanity itself. Her prophecies concerned entire ages, civilizations, the rise and fall of nations, the destiny of the world. That vast perspective made her feel timeless. She belonged to no single kingdom, no single century. She seemed to stand quietly outside history while gently observing it unfold. Modern historians studying medieval manuscripts often discover dozens of different versions of her prophecies. Some contradict one another. Others appear remarkably similar. Despite being copied hundreds of miles apart, this tells us something important. People did not preserve the Sibyl because they believed every sentence came directly from one historical woman. They preserved her because her voice helped them reflect upon uncertainty. She became a symbol of wisdom itself. As knowledge gradually expanded during the Renaissance, scholars began examining ancient texts more critically. Questions multiplied. Which prophecies were genuinely ancient? Which had been added centuries later? Could any historical Sibyl actually be identified? Clear answers remained elusive. The legendary prophetess slowly retreated from history into literature, yet she never completely disappeared. Even today, artists, writers, and musicians continue drawing inspiration from her quiet mystery. She reminds us that humanity has always searched for meaning beyond immediate experience. Perhaps every generation creates its own Sibyl, someone whose words seem capable of illuminating uncertain futures. As this peaceful night continues, imagine leaving the mountain cave. The eastern horizon has begun changing from deep blue to pale silver. Morning approaches slowly. Birds have not yet begun singing. Behind you, the old prophetess remains seated in silence. She does not ask anyone to believe her. She simply watches another sunrise, preparing to arrive. Perhaps that image explains why her legend endured. Not because she claimed absolute certainty, but because she encouraged thoughtful reflection. Sometimes wisdom begins with quietly accepting that the future cannot be fully known. The first light now touches the distant hills. Another chapter gently reaches its end. Yet one final legendary figure still waits beyond the horizon. Unlike the prophetess, whose vision stretched across centuries, this mysterious ruler was said to sleep beneath a mountain, waiting patiently until the day his people needed him again. He never truly ruled as history remembers. He never completely vanished from memory either. Instead, he became one of the medieval world's most enduring dreams, a king who would one day return. The medieval ruler who waited forever to return. A new morning slowly begins to unfold. The eastern sky is painted with soft shades of pale gold and gentle blue. Mist still lingers over the valleys, moving quietly across rivers that have flowed through these lands for countless generations. The roofs of small villages glisten with dew, while the first birds greet the coming day with calm, unhurried songs. It is a peaceful beginning, the kind of morning that reminds us how every ending quietly becomes another beginning. Throughout our journey, we have met kings who never ruled, knights who never rode into battle, travelers who never crossed distant deserts, and prophets whose voices echoed through centuries without leaving clear footprints in history. Now we arrive at one of the most comforting legends the medieval imagination ever created. It is not the story of a king who conquered the world, nor of a ruler who vanished forever. It is the story of a king who simply waited. Across medieval Europe, many lands shared a remarkably similar belief. Somewhere beneath a mountain, inside a hidden cave, or within an enchanted island, a great ruler still slept. He had not died. He had not abandoned his people. Instead, he rested peacefully, waiting for the day when his kingdom would need him once more. His exact name changed from country to country. In Britain, many believed King Arthur would one day return. In Germany, stories gathered around Emperor Frederick Barbarossa. Elsewhere, other rulers quietly took the same place in local tradition. The names differed. The dream remained the same. Imagine standing at the foot of an ancient mountain sometime during the late Middle Ages. The forest around you is wonderfully still. Sunlight filters gently through towering trees. Wild flowers grow beside narrow paths worn smooth by generations of travelers. An old shepherd notices you studying the mountain. He smiles kindly. Then, almost in a whisper, he tells you that a king sleeps inside. Not dead, only sleeping. His knights rest beside him. Their armor is not rusted, their banners have not faded. Time itself seems to have paused within the hidden chamber, One day, when darkness threatens the land again, the mountain will open. The king will awaken. His horse will carry him once more across the countryside. Justice will return. Peace will be restored. Then, just as quietly as he came, he will disappear once again. The shepherd speaks so naturally that for a moment it almost seems impossible to doubt him. Why did so many medieval people cherish stories like this? The answer reaches beyond history. Life during the Middle Ages was often uncertain. Wars changed kingdoms. Dynasties rose and fell. Harvests sometimes failed. Disease could arrive without warning. Many people lived through years when it seemed that stability had quietly slipped away. In such times, the legend of the sleeping king offered something precious. Hope, not loud hope, not unrealistic optimism, a quiet confidence that goodness had not vanished forever. It was simply waiting. Picture yourself walking toward the entrance of an ancient cave, hidden deep within the mountains. The air grows cooler with every step. Drops of water fall gently from the ceiling, their echoes disappearing into the darkness. You carry only a small lantern. Its warm light reveals walls shaped by nature over thousands of years. Then far ahead the cave widens. There, seated upon a stone throne, rests an old king. His hands lie peacefully upon the hilt of his sword. Around him sleep loyal companions. No one breathes loudly, no armor clatters. Only silence fills the chamber. A silence so complete that it almost feels sacred. You realize you have entered not a tomb, but a waiting place. Perhaps that gentle distinction explains why these legends survived for centuries. The king had not been defeated. History had simply paused. One of the most famous versions concerns Emperor Frederick Barbarossa. According to German legend, the emperor sleeps beneath the Kyffhauser mountain. His magnificent red beard has grown so long that it curls around a great stone table. From time to time he awakens briefly. He asks whether ravens still circle above the mountain. If they do, he closes his eyes and returns to sleep. The proper moment has not yet arrived. Modern historians know that Frederick Barbarossa died during the Third Crusade in 1190. Yet the legend refused to accept such an ordinary ending. People preferred imagining their emperor resting patiently beneath the mountain. History offered death. Legend offered return. Britain developed its own version through King Arthur. According to many medieval traditions, Arthur did not perish after the Battle of Camlan. Instead, he was carried across the water to the mysterious island of Avalon. There, surrounded by healing magic, he remained beyond ordinary time. One day, when Britain needed him most, he would return. Centuries passed. The promised return never came. Still, the story endured. Generation after generation found comfort in believing that some heroes never truly leave. Interestingly, these legends rarely focused upon revenge or conquest. The sleeping king did not awaken to expand his empire. He returned to restore balance, to heal, to protect, to guide. The emphasis remained wonderfully peaceful. The king represented wisdom gained through patience rather than endless warfare. Throughout medieval Europe,
Travelers often claimed to know someone who had glimpsed the hidden king. A hunter lost in the forest, a shepherd searching for wandering sheep, a monk traveling between distant monasteries. Each supposedly discovered the secret cave by accident. Each described the sleeping ruler in remarkably similar ways, and each somehow found the entrance impossible to locate ever again. These stories spread naturally because they invited listeners to imagine that extraordinary mysteries might exist quietly beside ordinary life. Perhaps the mountain visible from your own village concealed more than anyone realized. Perhaps history rested just beneath familiar ground. As centuries passed, artists eagerly illustrated these legends. They painted kings sleeping peacefully beneath enormous stone arches. Torches flickered gently around silent nights. Outside, forests changed with the passing seasons, while inside the cave, time stood completely still. The contrast fascinated medieval audiences. Nature moved forward, history waited. The legend became more than entertainment. It became a symbol of memory itself. Every nation carries stories of its greatest days. Sometimes those memories become so treasured that people cannot bear to imagine them ending forever. Instead, they transform them into promises. The past is not gone. It merely sleeps. One day, perhaps it will awaken. Modern historians recognize these stories as legends rather than historical events. No hidden chambers beneath mountains have revealed sleeping kings surrounded by faithful knights. Yet the emotional truth within the stories remains remarkably powerful. Human beings naturally hope that wisdom can return during difficult times. Every generation longs for leaders guided by justice rather than selfish ambition. The sleeping king quietly embodies that universal hope. Perhaps this explains why similar legends appear in many cultures around the world. Although the names change, the dream remains familiar. Somewhere, a good ruler waits patiently beyond the reach of ordinary history. As the morning sun climbs higher, imagine leaving the mountain behind. You walk slowly through peaceful forests where birds sing among the branches. The entrance to the hidden cave has vanished. Only trees remain. Perhaps you imagined everything, or perhaps some mysteries simply choose not to reveal themselves twice. Either way, you continue your journey, carrying something invisible. Hope. Not certainty. Not proof. Just the quiet belief that goodness never disappears completely. Sometimes it rests. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it returns in forms we least expect. The road ahead grows brighter with every step. Fields stretch toward the horizon. The gentle breeze carries the scent of wild flowers. Our long journey through the medieval imagination is almost complete. Only one final chapter remains. There we will look back upon every legendary king, knight, traveler, prophet, and dreamer we have encountered. Together, we will discover why people who never existed have continued shaping history for hundreds of years, and why their stories still accompany us even today. The morning has fully arrived. The mountain grows smaller behind us. The sleeping king returns to his peaceful silence. And somewhere beyond the next hill, the final page of our journey patiently waits to be opened. Why the medieval characters who never existed still live among us today. Our journey is almost complete. The sun has begun its slow descent toward the western horizon, bathing the medieval countryside in a warm, golden light. The long shadows of ancient oak trees stretch across quiet fields where farmers have nearly finished their day's work. A gentle breeze carries the scent of fresh grass and distant wood smoke, while the steady ringing of evening bells drifts peacefully from a nearby monastery. The world feels wonderfully calm, as though history itself has decided to slow its pace for just a little while. We have traveled together through castles that never truly stood as legends describe them. We have walked beside kings whose crowns existed more vividly in stories than in official records. We have followed knights whose courage inspired generations despite leaving no trace in reliable history. We have crossed impossible kingdoms, searched for hidden emperors, listened to mysterious prophetesses, and waited patiently outside mountains where sleeping rulers were said to dream beneath the earth. None of these people can be confidently placed inside the pages of history. Yet none of them have truly disappeared. That quiet contradiction lies at the heart of the medieval imagination. History records what happened. Stories preserve what people hoped could happen. Both become part of humanity's memory. Imagine entering a medieval village one final time. The evening market is closing. Merchants carefully pack away their goods. Children chase one another through narrow streets before being called home. The smell of fresh bread drifts from a nearby bakery. A blacksmith finishes his final piece of work for the day. Nothing about the village appears extraordinary. Yet inside almost every home, someone knows at least one legendary tale. A grandmother remembers Arthur. A father tells stories of Lancelot. A young monk copies the adventures of Galahad. A traveler speaks of distant kingdoms ruled by Prester John. None of these stories belong to official history. All of them belong to daily life. Perhaps that is where legends truly live. Not inside castles, not inside libraries, but inside ordinary conversations. Throughout the Middle Ages, storytelling served purposes far greater than entertainment. Stories taught values. They preserved hope. They explained mysteries. They comforted people during uncertain times. Long before printed books became common, memory itself acted as humanity's greatest library. Every storyteller became both an artist and a guardian. Every listener became the future teller of another tale. The characters we have met survived because they fulfilled needs that facts alone could never completely satisfy. King Arthur reminded people that justice could guide power. Merlin suggested that wisdom should always stand beside authority. Lancelot revealed that even the noblest hearts struggle with difficult choices. Galahad demonstrated that inner goodness mattered more than worldly success. Sir John Mandeville encouraged curiosity about distant cultures and unfamiliar lands. Prester John embodied hope that goodness might exist beyond the visible horizon. The Sibyl reflected humanity's endless search for meaning in an uncertain future,
The sleeping king reminded generations that hope can patiently endure through even the darkest times. Each figure represented an idea. Ideas often outlive people. That is why fictional characters sometimes survive longer than real kings. History remembers countless rulers whose names now rest quietly inside forgotten documents. Meanwhile, children across the world still recognize Arthur. Readers still admire Merlin. Artists still paint the Holy Grail. Writers continue reinventing Camelot. Filmmakers return again and again to these familiar legends. Modern fantasy literature owes an enormous debt to medieval imagination. The wise old wizard, the noble king, the reluctant hero, the sacred quest, the enchanted sword, the hidden kingdom, the mysterious prophecy. These beloved themes did not appear by accident. They grew slowly across centuries of storytelling before becoming foundations of modern fiction. Whenever we open a fantasy novel today, we still hear faint echoes of medieval voices. Perhaps without realizing it, we continue telling the same stories. Only the settings have changed. Imagine walking through a modern bookstore. Shelves overflow with novels about magical worlds, forgotten kingdoms, heroic companions, and ancient prophecies. Millions of readers eagerly lose themselves within these pages. Technology has changed. Clothing has changed. Languages have changed. Yet the human imagination continues asking the same quiet questions. What makes a good leader? Can courage overcome fear? Is wisdom stronger than violence? Does kindness truly matter? Can hope survive difficult times? These are medieval questions. They are also timeless human questions. This may explain why the characters who never existed continue feeling strangely familiar. They reflect something permanent within ourselves. Historians often remind us that separating fact from legend remains important. They are absolutely right. Careful research allows us to understand the real medieval world more accurately. We now know that many legendary stories developed gradually over hundreds of years. We recognize literary inventions that earlier generations accepted as historical truth. Archaeology has corrected many old misunderstandings. Ancient manuscripts continue revealing how legends evolved. Knowledge has grown enormously. Yet something remarkable happened along the way. As historians uncovered more accurate facts, the legends did not disappear. Instead, they found a different home. No longer mistaken for history, they became treasured literature. That transformation may be one of humanity's greatest achievements. We learn to appreciate stories not because they are literally true, but because they express emotional truths that remain deeply meaningful. The medieval imagination still has something gentle to teach us. It reminds us that people have always searched for examples of courage, always longed for wise leaders, always dreamed about peaceful kingdoms, always wondered what lay beyond the horizon, always hoped that goodness might somehow return after difficult times. Those hopes belong not only to medieval Europe, they belong to every generation. As our long journey slowly comes to its end, imagine yourself standing upon a quiet hill overlooking the medieval landscape, one final time. The castles appear smaller now. The forests stretch peacefully toward the horizon. A narrow river reflects the warm colors of the setting sun. Smoke rises gently from distant villages where evening meals are being prepared. Somewhere beyond those hills, Arthur still rides through imagination. Merlin still walks quietly beneath ancient trees. Lancelot continues seeking honor.
Galahad follows the distant light of the Grail. Mandeville sets out toward another impossible horizon. Prester John's invisible kingdom still inspires hope. The Sibyl still watches tomorrow with calm eyes. The sleeping king still rests patiently beneath the mountain. They remain exactly where stories have always lived. Not inside history, inside memory. Perhaps that is where they truly belong. The daylight gradually softens into twilight.
The first stars quietly appear above the peaceful countryside. One by one, the familiar figures we have followed begin fading into the gentle evening mist. Not because they are disappearing forever,
but because every story eventually reaches the moment when it must be passed to another listener. The wind moves softly through the trees. The monastery bells ring one final time. The candles inside distant cottages begin glowing warmly against the growing darkness.
Another storyteller somewhere is already preparing to begin these legends again. Perhaps with different words, perhaps with new details, yet always with the same quiet purpose.
To remind each new generation that history is shaped not only by those who truly lived, but also by those humanity imagined into existence. Sometimes the people who never walked the earth leave footprints that time itself cannot erase. And as the medieval world slowly disappears into the peaceful silence of night, we leave it with one final thought. Facts tell us where we came from. Legends remind us who we hope to become. The road grows quiet. The last candle gently flickers. The story is complete. Good night.